France, 1788. The price of bread has tripled. The harvest has failed for the second year in a row, and the French government has just raised the gabelle, the salt tax. Again, salt wasn't a luxury. It was the only way to preserve food through winter. For the peasants of France, the gabelle didn't just empty purses. Without salt, meat rotted, fish spoiled, vegetables became inedible. For the peasants of France, the gabelle determined whether their children ate through January or didn't. The French Revolution began over bread, but the salt tax was the knife already buried in the body. 1 year later, the Bastille fell. This is the history of salt. Salt is the oldest condiment on Earth. Evidence of salt harvesting goes back 8,000 years to the shores of a Neolithic lake in what is now Romania. They didn't understand chemistry. They understood that meat rubbed with these crystals lasted longer. Every civilization in the ancient world organized itself around salt access. Salt is critical to human muscle function, to nerve transmission, to the regulation of body fluids. Ancient armies didn't understand this in biochemical terms. They understood it because soldiers without salt stopped fighting. Rome's Via Salaria, the Salt Road, was one of the first roads built in Italian history. It ran from the salt pans on the Adriatic coast to Rome, 300 kilometers inland. The word salary comes from the Latin salarium, the allowance given to soldiers to buy it. Armies that ran out of salt didn't just lose their supplies. They lost their soldiers to disease. The ancient Egyptians used salt in mummification. Bodies packed in natron were preserved for thousands of years. The evidence of that preservation is still walking around museums today. But the ancient world's most important salt story isn't Egypt. It is Rome. Salt was how Rome made dependencies and kept them. Every territory that needed Roman salt needed Rome. Here is the twist that almost nobody knows. Roman soldiers were not paid in salt. That is a myth. The salarium was payment for purchasing salt, not the salt itself. The Roman Empire controlled salt production. Wherever it expanded, conquered territories with salt deposits were immediately incorporated into the imperial supply chain. Territories without salt were dependent on Rome for their survival. Then Rome fell, and something remarkable happened to salt. The salt routes fell apart. New powers emerged to control them. Then Rome fell, and something remarkable happened to salt. In medieval Europe, salt was the basis of the fish trade, the protein supply for an entire continent. Herring, the humble North Sea herring, salted in barrels, made the medieval Baltic economy function. The Hanseatic League, the great medieval trading alliance, was built almost entirely on the salted herring trade. Fleets of ships, hundreds of cities, thousands of merchants, all organized around one question: how to get enough salt to the Baltic to cure enough fish to feed Northern Europe through winter. The city of Lebec became one of the wealthiest cities in Europe, not because of gold or spices, because of its position controlling salt routes to the herring fisheries. In West Africa, salt was more valuable than gold by weight. There were places where a kilogram of salt bought a kilogram of gold. Timbuktu grew rich where salt from the north met gold from the south. Arab geographers wrote that the people of Mali sat on gold but starved for salt. The physics of scarcity, not the chemistry of value. One side had gold, the other had salt. The Saharan salt deposits that powered these trade routes were lakes that dried 10,000 years ago. When a kilogram of salt bought a kilogram of gold, both parties were getting what they needed most. By the way, if you are following this series, we've covered sewers, water, paper, and now salt. If you want the next part, hit subscribe. Now, back to the story. Governments understood what salt meant, and many of them used that understanding badly. The gabelle in France was introduced in the 14th century. By the 18th century, it was a system of organized extortion. Salt smuggling became one of the most dangerous criminal enterprises in Europe. Smugglers were executed, galley, enslaved, branded. An estimated 30,000 people per year were arrested for salt smuggling in 18th century France. The French Revolution abolished the gabelle in one of its first acts. The punishment for a second offense at salt smuggling had been death. The revolution made it free. The British salt tax in India was different in mechanism, but identical in logic. The British made it criminal to collect Indian salt without payment. They taxed what had been free for millennia. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi walked 240 miles to the sea, 240 miles to Dandi, walking. He picked up a handful of natural salt from the beach, and declared the British salt laws broken. 60,000 Indians were arrested in the weeks that followed. The Salt March cracked the moral authority of empire in a way that nothing before it had. The world watched Indian civilians being beaten for collecting salt. Empire couldn't survive that image. India was independent. 17 years after, Gandhi walked to the sea. You cannot maintain the fiction of benevolent governance while taxing salt. Today, salt costs almost nothing. The food industry adds salt to almost everything processed, not only for taste, because salt is still a preservative. The Dead Sea has so much salt that nothing lives in it. No fish, no plants. You float without trying. 27% salt by weight, 10 times saltier than the ocean. The physics of concentration made visible. A kilogram for less than $1. The price of what once bought a kilogram of gold. 3 billion tons of salt per year. More than 2/3 goes into chemical manufacturing and road de-icing, not food. A kilogram for less than $1 in most of the world. The substance that financed empires, built roads, launched revolutions, given away in paper packets. The reason is geology. Industrial mining made underground deposits accessible at scale. The Cura salt mine in Pakistan has been mined since the 14th century. Modern extraction methods commoditize salt within 2 generations. 3 billion tons of salt are produced every year. Most of it goes on roads, not food, not armies, not empire, roads. And yet, the human body still requires it. 2 to 3 grams a day, minimum, or muscle cramps begin. 5 to 6 grams a day if you are exerting yourself or the heart begins to misbehave. We put it in sports drinks now. Same mineral, same function, same physics. The armies that marched on the Via Salaria weren't wrong to make it the center of their supply chain. Neither were the Hanseatic merchants, or the Malian kings, or the French peasants who smuggled it rather than pay the gabelle. Roman soldiers were paid in coins, but the coins existed because of salt. The salary bought the salt. In 1789, people were executed for buying salt cheaply. Now restaurants give it away, the substance that determined survival for most of human history. Now the cheapest thing on the table. Salt didn't just flavor food, it was the invisible infrastructure of every civilization that came before. Refrigeration. It was what stood between a society and starvation, and in the places where it was taxed into inaccessibility, it was what brought governments down. At 3 in the morning after a snowstorm, a truck is keeping your city safe with salt. 8,000 years of civilization, and we still can't stop reaching for it. If you learned something today, hit like and subscribe for more hidden histories. And next week, we cover the substance that powered empires before salt did, the history of fire. Until then, history is everywhere.